Imagine training your entire life for one moment, only to have 3 judges steal your victory. These UFC robberies will make your blood boil. The Hendricks Heist, UFC 167, November 16, 2013. Las Vegas, the MGM Arena. Georges St-Pierre, the welterweight king, defending his throne against the explosive power of Johnny Hendricks. What happened that night would go down as perhaps the most controversial decision in UFC history. Georges St-Pierre entered UFC 167 as the pound-for-pound king. Undefeated in nearly a decade, he was the golden boy of the UFC. But Johnny Big Rig Hendricks had other plans. From the opening bell, Hendricks unleashed a violent symphony of left hands that had GSP looking more mortal than he had in years. Round 1. Hendricks drops GSP with a crushing left hand. The Canadian champion survives, but it's clear who won the round. Round 2. More of the same. Hendricks is landing the harder shots, controlling the pace, making the champion look ordinary. By the end of round 3, even the most diehard GSP fans were starting to accept the inevitable. The reign was over. But then something strange happened. The championship rounds arrived, and while GSP showed his legendary heart, the damage was done. Hendricks had clearly won at least 3 rounds. The stats backed it up. Hendricks outlanded GSP in significant strikes, had more knockdowns, more moments of dominance. When the final bell rang, there wasn't a person in that arena who thought GSP had won, except for 2 of the 3 judges. Split decision, and still the UFC welterweight champion of the world. The boos were deafening. The look on Hendricks' face was pure devastation. Joe Rogan, usually diplomatic, couldn't hide his shock. The MMA media was unanimous. 43 out of 45 media members scored the fight for Hendricks. But in the only scores that mattered, GSP had somehow retained his title. This wasn't just a bad decision. This was a career-altering robbery that changed the trajectory of 2 fighters forever. GSP, shaken by the controversy and his own performance, would vacate the title and disappear from the sport for 4 years. Hendricks, meanwhile, would never be the same. The psychological damage of having victory stolen from him seemed to break something inside the explosive wrestler. He'd win the vacant title months later, but the fire was gone. The legend killer that never was. UFC 247. Fast forward to February 8th, 2020. Houston, Texas. Jon Jones, the most dominant light heavyweight in UFC history, was facing his biggest test in years. Dominick Reyes, the undefeated contender with knockout power and the perfect style to trouble bones. For 2 rounds, the impossible was happening. Reyes was outboxing the greatest fighter of all time. His jab was finding its mark. His footwork was keeping him out of danger. Jones, for the first time in his career, looked confused, frustrated, and, dare we say it, beatable. Round 1 clearly went to Reyes. Round 2 was even more dominant for the challenger. By the end of round 3, even Jones' most loyal supporters were starting to wonder if they were witnessing history. The king was being dethroned by a relative unknown. But championship rounds are called championship rounds for a reason. Jones, drawing on years of experience and that championship mentality, began to turn the tide. Rounds 4 and 5 were closer, with Jones showing flashes of his old dominance. But was it enough to overcome the early deficit? When the scorecards were read, the answer was apparently yes. Unanimous decision for Jon Jones. But the reaction told a different story. The crowd erupted in boos. Social media exploded with outrage. Even Jones himself seemed surprised by the decision. His celebration muted and awkward. The numbers painted a clear picture. Reyes had outlanded Jones in significant strikes through the first 3 rounds. He'd controlled the distance, dictated the pace, and made the greatest light heavyweight of all time look ordinary. Yet somehow, Jones retained his title. This decision didn't just rob Reyes of his moment, it robbed the sport of one of its greatest upset stories. Reyes would never be the same fighter, losing his next 2 fights and falling from title contention. Meanwhile, Jones, perhaps sensing the writing on the wall, would vacate the title months later and move to heavyweight. The Diego Sanchez phenomenon. If you want to see the true depths of judging incompetence, you need to understand the Diego Sanchez phenomenon. Throughout his career, the Nightmare seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to win fights he clearly lost. It happened so often that it became a running joke in the MMA community. If you fought Diego Sanchez in Albuquerque, you better knock him out because you weren't winning a decision. The most egregious example came on June 7th, 2014 at UFC Fight Night 42. Ross Pearson, a skilled British striker, put on a clinic against Sanchez. For 3 rounds, Pearson outlanded, outworked, and outclassed the hometown favorite. It wasn't close. It wasn't competitive. It was a systematic dismantling. When the decision was announced, unanimous decision for Diego Sanchez, the MMA world collectively lost its mind. In a post-fight poll, 82% of fans said it was definitely a robbery. Media members were calling it one of the worst decisions in UFC history. Even Sanchez himself seemed surprised by the victory. But this wasn't an isolated incident. Sanchez had benefited from similarly questionable decisions against Martin Kampmann and Takanori Gomi. A pattern was emerging. When Diego fought at home, the judges seemed to see a different fight than everyone else. The Shogun scandal, UFC 104, and sometimes a robbery is so obvious that it changes the entire trajectory of a division. October 24, 2009. Los Angeles, Lyoto Machida, the undefeated light heavyweight champion with his unique karate style, was defending his title against Mauricio Shogun Rua, the former Pride champion looking to reclaim his throne. For 5 rounds, Shogun systematically broke down the champion. His leg kicks were chopping down Machida's base. His boxing was finding its mark. His aggression was undeniable. By the final bell, Machida looked like he'd been through a war, while Shogun looked ready to go another 5 rounds. The crowd was on its feet, ready to crown a new champion. Shogun's corner was celebrating. Even Machida seemed to acknowledge that he'd lost the fight. But when the scorecards were read, unanimous decision for Lyoto Machida, the arena erupted in boos. Every single media member at ringside had scored the fight for Shogun. The stats showed Shogun had outlanded Machida in significant strikes. The visual evidence was overwhelming. Yet somehow, all 3 judges saw a different fight. The backlash was immediate and severe. Dana White, rarely one to criticize his own judges, admitted the decision was wrong. The UFC was forced to book an immediate rematch, where Shogun would knock out Machida in the first round to claim the title he should have won months earlier. The Paddy Pimblett Protection Program. Fast forward to December 10th, 2022, UFC 282 in Las Vegas. Paddy the Baddy Pimblett, the UFC's golden boy from Liverpool, was facing his toughest test yet in Jared Gordon. The UFC had big plans for Pimblett. He was their next potential superstar, the man who could crack the American market like Conor McGregor had done years earlier. But Gordon didn't get the memo. For 3 rounds, Flash outworked, outboxed, and outclassed the heavily favored Brit. Gordon's jab was finding its mark. His takedown defense was solid. His cardio was superior. By the final bell, it was clear who had won, except to the judges. When the unanimous decision was announced for Pimblett, the reaction was swift and brutal. Of the 24 media members scoring the fight, 23 had it for Gordon. Social media exploded with accusations of corruption. Even Pimblett's own fans seemed embarrassed by the decision. This wasn't just a bad decision. It was a transparent attempt to protect a rising star. The UFC had invested heavily in Pimblett's marketability, and a loss to Gordon would have derailed their plans. So instead of accepting that their golden boy had been outclassed, they allowed the judges to hand him a victory he didn't earn. The women's division disaster. The incompetence isn't limited to the men's divisions. On August 21st, 2021, at UFC Vegas 32, 2 rising women's flyweight prospects squared off in what should have been a showcase for the future of the division. Macy Barber, the future, was facing Miranda Maverick in a fight that could determine the next title contender. For 3 rounds, Maverick put on a clinic. Her striking was sharper. Her grappling was more effective. Her fight IQ was superior. It was a dominant performance that should have launched her into title contention. But when the scorecards were read, Barber was declared the winner by split decision. The reaction was immediate and universal. Every single media member at ringside had scored the fight for Maverick. Not one, not most, all of them. This decision didn't just rob Maverick of a victory, it robbed the women's flyweight division of its rightful contender. Barber would go on to receive bigger fights and more opportunities, while Maverick was forced to rebuild from a loss that should have been a career-defining win. What's the worst robbery you've ever seen? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shaped MMA history. Because in a sport where anything can happen, the most shocking moments often happen after the final bell rings.